Well, hello everyone. This is Daniel here at the SOLA Network, and here I am with Dr. Peter Cha. And I'm going to have you introduce yourself in a bit, and I'm also going to ask you about the Thriving Immigrant Church Initiative. So let's start with you and tell me what you do and how you serve in the kingdom.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Cha, and I'm a faculty member at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and I am teaching in a pastoral theology department. I've been here now for 28 years. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to just shape next generation's leaders for United States and globally, since Trinity attracts students also from different continents. But also at the same time, I often had the opportunity to serve a broader church. And the initiative that I'm working on, called Thriving Immigrant Congregations Initiative, is a one way to particularly serve immigrant churches that have been really struggling with this perennial challenge of how to bring first and second and now third generation leaders and members so that they might be able to have common vision of the ministry for their congregations. So I've been working on that last 2-3 years. Before my teaching at Trinity, I was a pastor at Korean American and then Asian American churches. So I was also, for about 7 years, staff worker for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, serving on college campuses. And I come from a Korean American background. My dad was a immigrant church pastor serving in Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. And in many ways, my leading a TICI initiative is bring me back to that earlier years of immigrant congregational experiences.
Oh, okay. Well, you've been everywhere and you are serving the church in different capacities, and now you are a seminary instructor, but you are very much connected to the church. I'd like to ask you more about TICI. Can you tell me more about how that started and what's the goal?
Yes. So on behalf of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, I submitted a proposal to Lilly Endowment for a large grant that would enable me to work with other colleagues in serving immigrant churches to internally develop a healthy first and second gen collaborative partnership within a church so that they might be more effectively working together in doing the ministry of the gospel in their surrounding communities locally and then global overseas missions. So it's really, it has a twofold purpose: how to bring first and second generation together so that they would create a healthier partnership and a culture within the church so that they might be more effective in their ministry of outreach broadly.
Hmm. Why do you feel like this is a needed initiative or this effort?
Yeah, so for at least when I was doing a second gen ministry during 1980s and 90s, we had assumed that second generation will all leave their immigrant churches. That's why there was terms like silent exodus and so forth. But then I don't know about in the West Coast, but in the Midwest and the East Coast, we began to see about last 10, 15 years or so, many of the second gen families now whose children, third gen, are in adolescent years, seeking to come back to ethnic immigrant churches as their own children are now wrestling with the identity issues and so forth. And also now their aging parents are no longer able to drive. So the second gen have to drive their parents to their first gen congregation, and then they would go to some other churches. Anyway, for a number of reasons, I believe many of the second gen families have returned to their ethnic immigrant churches. Now, the question mark is they're constantly looking for a church where they would be received, welcomed, and empowered to exercise their spiritual gifts as equal members and leaders of the church and not be treated as children. So I think that changing needs and the context of immigrant church makes it important and necessary for these immigrant congregations to learn how to make that space for the second gen adults now who can have an effective partnership with the first gen immigrant pastors and leaders and so forth. And thankfully, there have been a number of churches that have been doing this quite well, actually.
Mhm.
And we are using one particular church as a case study for these other 11, 12 churches to enter into that space so that they can learn from their mistakes as well as their insights and reflections over this church's 25-year journey to do this first and second gen ministry well together. So we have about 12 churches that are part of this first cohort that are engaged in 2-year learning journey experience. And that comes to an end this fall. And we're right now in the application process for the second cohort that will again begin the 2-year learning journey next spring.
Mm. So it sounds like one of the main things you're doing is having these representatives from these churches come together and journey
Yes.
through this together. You mentioned a bit about a case study church as well. Can you talk more about, what do you do during these meetings? What's going on? What are you trying to accomplish?
Yes, thank you. Well, let me first introduce the case study church. It's a church actually my father planted in Northern Virginia in 1984. And the current senior pastor is a classmate of mine from Trinity days in 1980s. And he's a 1.5 generation, went there. It's called Open Door Presbyterian Church in Northern Virginia. And Paul Kim, that's the senior pastor's name, began his first gen ministry, I believe in 1992 and 93. He is now bilingual, bicultural 1.5. And the EM pastor is my younger brother named John Cha. And he grew up in that church and he's been doing that EM ministry with a Paul Kim last 25 plus years. And those two pastors in particular made a deep commitment to share this ministry journey together and treat each other equally and trying to empower the next generation to step up to be leaders for that congregation. It's not a perfect church, but I've been involved in consulting that church over the last 25 years, partly because it's my home church, but also I wanted so desperately to, if you will, help this congregation to be a source of hope for many immigrant churches where this intergenerational conflicts are basically destroying from within the fabrics of the church. And so, again, we're not using this church as a case study because it is a perfect church, but it's been on this journey for 25 years. And these two pastors have been very open about sharing both their mistakes, about some moments of God's sheer grace that they did not work for, as well as certain circumstances that they had to navigate through. So now these 12 churches, we get together twice each year, 3 days at a time. And our very first gathering is on the campus of an Open Door Church. So we get to meet their elders, we get to see their facilities, interact with their staff, as well as these two pastors sharing their journey story. And then the other 3 times we meet in Chicago, both on Trinity campus, as well as in one of our TICI churches. But these two pastors, Paul Kim and John Cha, they come to these settings. And one of the sessions that we have all the time is to continually hearing their story. And because these 12 church leaders and members have been to Open Door, they are able to, if you will, visualize when these pastors tell their stories, what had happened and so forth. So in many ways, we are hoping to use this case study, not to say there is only one model or one approach to do a healthy immigrant church ministry, but to kind of, as you know, case study is an effective teaching tool in which students can enter into that space and able to imagine and visualize their own context in light of the story that they hear about that case study. And so that's one of the methods that we have used in this 2-year learning journey.
This it sounds like one of the big things that you're doing is to really move immigrant churches towards greater health by really having good relationships between the generations. You had mentioned EM. For those of you who don't know, EM stands for English Ministry, and that's when we have in the church also that the church also has a mother tongue ministry and
Hmm.
an English ministry as well because they're in
Hmm.
America. Um, you talk about immigrant churches. So that's a pretty wide net.
Right.
Can you tell me more about that dynamic and then what you have observed with the group of churches you
Sure.
have?
So we decided to publicize and invite the applications from all immigrant churches, not only restricting it to Korean, Japanese, or whatever, but and so for this first cohort, we have Nigerians, we have Chinese, and Korean. We decided to target cluster groups of immigrant congregations because they're first generation, as you can tell. I mean, they do not speak English. That's not their mother tongue. They have to have a certain level of proficiency in English to come to our gathering, since everything is done in English. However, having said that, by having clusters, there will be some chance of a fellowship among co-ethnics, particularly among first generation. So we have a group of Nigerian churches, Chinese, and Korean. And then for the next cohort, it looks like we'll have even more diversity. We already have Indian churches that have applied, Nigerians, as well as a Hispanic, and then Korean and Chinese. So I think next group's going to be a far more diverse. And as you have mentioned, because their histories are quite different, and also the church traditions are somewhat different. Um, it's been a really interesting experience for our Korean pastors to learn from Chinese and Chinese pastors to look at what Nigerian churches are working with and learn from them. So one of the Chinese American pastors told me, Dr. Chad, one of the profound learning experience for me and his congregation, the Chinese congregation, is that when they hear Nigerian churches having this intergenerational conflict, even when they use English as their worship language and the ministry language, that the language is not the main barrier or factor that is causing intergenerational conflicts. He said, for us Chinese churches, we often blame the language difference as the main source of conflicts in the church. And we realize it's far more than that. So I remember this young Chinese American pastor said that it was very impactful for him to listen to Nigerian church brothers and sisters having their conversation about the source of their conflict.
Mm. You've already mentioned some of the fruit that you've seen from from these cohorts. What else have you
Mm-hmm.
seen in terms of things that are going to serve the church at large?
Yeah, first of all, there is no one magic bullet
Mm.
that's going to apply to all churches. And the context matters deeply. So even among, let's say there are two Korean American churches, their context could be quite different, particularly in that what kind of first and second generation relational history that church had in the past will be very critical in determining what might be a way forward. Um, so the context matters, and therefore, I think church leaders need to think contextually about finding an approach that would work well for their church. And so that's one. I think the second one is that right information or right idea itself does not work. Uh, I think when I was a young pastor, there were some immigrant church conferences where the pastors come together and we hear about some brilliant ideas and walk away thinking, okay, if I do that, that would work. But we often run into a wall because a lot of these issues are quite complex that you cannot by yourself do it, even if you're a pastor.
Mm.
It really requires a long-term collaborative partnership together to solve these issues biblically, pastorally, and with wisdom and perseverance, right? And that requires a long term commitment, that requires a collaboration, And that means, first of all, that really requires God's grace. But secondly, that requires a long-term commitment toward the same direction. And I think after 2 years, these churches are realizing that we finally got things moving, and we cannot stop after 2 years. We have to continue to meet, continue to pray, continue to work toward kind of Christ-centered unity that Scripture lifts up, that we need to be able to practice that together, uh, despite of our language and cultural barriers. So I think that sense of a journey, and this is only the beginning, is I think what these churches are understanding, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So in order to participate in our 2-year journey, each church needs to put together a team of 5 people to meet together monthly as a team, and then come to these meetings that we've been having. And each team must have a first gen senior leader, senior pastor, and then second gen pastor, and then first gen elder, second gen elder, and then one of the women members of the church.
Mm.
And they've been meeting together for 2 years now, each month, to pray and to work on those projects that we asked them to work on. And many of these churches are deciding to continue that meeting even after this 2-year program ends. And I think that kind of perseverance and commitment is needed.
Mm. Well, you mentioned several times that you are in the application process. Can you talk more about what the qualifications are for a church that might be interested in doing something like this, and what's the process, and how do they
Sure.
start?
So for a number of reasons, we decided to limit this application parameter to immigrant churches in the Midwest and the East Coast. And so that covers anywhere from Texas to Minneapolis and then east. And the application deadline would be end of September. And if you go to hebercenter.org, it's our Paul Heber Center for World Christianity on our campus is the organization that's hosting this program. So it's a hebercenter.org. They could find the TICI website, and then there is the application form for it. Otherwise, if you like to receive more information, my personal email address is pcha@tiu.edu, and I'll be happy to send the application. It's an online form, and the deadline is on September 30th. And we've been already receiving many applications for the next journey.
Well, good. It sounds like this has been fruitful, and you're looking forward to engaging with more churches and really trying to figure out how to serve the rest of the church at large together.
Yes, and we really hope and pray that the Lord would raise more churches where reconciliation between parents and children, that generational reconciliation will really strengthen many immigrant churches so that they might have more vibrant witnessing ability both locally and globally. And that is our hope.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, Dr. Peter Cha, everyone, thank you for your time. This has been encouraging to me, and I'm glad that you're doing this, and this would be of interest to many of our readers and listeners.
Thank you for this invitation and this opportunity, Daniel.
All right.